Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. Today we're going on quite a journey that's equal parts delicious and thought-provoking. We're talking apples. I mean, who doesn't love a good apple? But have you ever stopped to think about how the apples we eat today compare to the ones folks were enjoying back in the 1950s? We're not just talking about a difference in taste here, though that's definitely part of it. We're talking about fundamental changes in their genetic makeup, their nutritional content, and the way they're grown. It's kind of wild to think about how much can change in just a few decades and what those changes mean for us as consumers and, living beings on this planet. So if you're ready to take a bite out of history and maybe learn a thing or two about the apple of your eye, pun intended obviously, stick around. Let's get into it. All right, let's kick things off by talking about something that might sound a little intimidating at first: genetics. When we talk about the difference between a 1950s apple and a modern apple, we're not just talking about different varieties, though that is part of it. We're talking about changes at the DNA level. It's like comparing a handwritten letter to a perfectly formatted email. Both convey information, but the way they do it is completely different. See, back in the 1950s, apple breeding was a slower, more natural process. Farmers would crossbreed different apple varieties to select for desirable traits like taste, size, and resistance to disease. It was like a slow dance of genes, with each generation inheriting a mix of characteristics from its parents. Today, however, things are much more targeted. Scientists can now identify specific genes responsible for certain traits and use genetic engineering techniques to introduce those genes directly into an apple's DNA. This means they can create apples with very specific characteristics like increased sweetness, longer shelf life, or even resistance to certain pests. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Hold on, are you saying they're putting fish genes in my apples? And the answer, at least for now, is no. Genetic modification in apples, at least the kind that's commercially available, mostly focuses on enhancing existing apple genes or silencing ones that cause problems. But it does raise some interesting questions about what we consider natural when it comes to our food. I mean, humans have been manipulating plant and animal genes through selective breeding for millennia. That's how we got from tiny wild strawberries to the juicy ones we enjoy today. But with genetic engineering, we're taking a much more direct and rapid approach. It's like the difference between writing a novel by hand and using a word processor. Both can result in a compelling story, but the tools and techniques used are vastly different. And just like with any new technology, there are potential benefits and drawbacks to consider. On the one hand, genetic modification has the potential to create apples that are more resistant to disease, require fewer pesticides, and have a longer shelf life, which could help reduce food waste. That's pretty huge when you think about the challenges facing our global food system. But on the other hand, there are concerns about the long-term effects of genetically modified crops on the environment and human health. Some people worry that these modified genes could spread to wild plants, creating superweeds that are difficult to control. Others are concerned about potential allergic reactions or other unforeseen health consequences. It's a complex issue with no easy answers, and it's one that deserves careful consideration and ongoing research. But one thing's for sure, the apples we eat today are products of both natural selection and human ingenuity. They're a testament to our ongoing quest to improve the foods we eat, even if it means tinkering with the very building blocks of life. Okay, so we've talked about how modern apples have undergone some pretty significant genetic makeovers, but let's dive a little deeper into one particular aspect of that: genetically modified organisms, or GMOs as they're commonly known. Now, I know this is a topic that can spark some pretty heated debates, so let's try to approach it with a healthy dose of curiosity and, maybe a side of apple pie to keep things civil. When it comes to apples, GMOs are all about introducing specific genes into their DNA to achieve a desired outcome. And one of the most common outcomes that scientists are aiming for is resistance to browning. You know that thing that happens when you cut an apple open and it starts to turn brown? It's a natural process called oxidation, but it's not exactly the most appealing thing to look at, right? So scientists have figured out a way to essentially turn off the gene that causes browning in apples, creating varieties that stay nice and crisp looking even after they've been sliced. Pretty neat, right? Well, it depends on who you ask. Proponents of GMO apples argue that this technology offers a bunch of benefits. For starters, It can help reduce food waste. I mean, how many times have you thrown out a perfectly good apple just because it had a few brown spots on it? With GMO apples, that's less likely to happen. Plus, they say it can reduce the need for pesticides and herbicides, which is good for the environment and for us. But of course, there's another side to this story. Critics of GMOs argue that we simply don't know enough about the long-term health effects of consuming genetically modified foods. They point out that there's been limited research on the topic, and that we should err on the side of caution when it comes to messing with the genetic makeup of our food. There are also concerns about the potential impact of GMOs on biodiversity. Some folks worry that these modified crops could cross-pollinate with wild varieties, leading to unintended consequences for ecosystems. It's kind of like a game of genetic Jenga. You pull out one block and hope the whole thing doesn't come crashing down. So where do you stand on the GMO Apple debate? It's a tough one, right? There are valid points to be made on both sides. Ultimately, it's up to each individual to decide what they're comfortable with. But I think it's important to be informed about the science and the potential risks and benefits before forming an opinion. All right, let's dig into something that's probably on all of our minds when we think about food nutrition. Specifically, how do the vitamins and minerals in those crisp 1950s apples stack up against the ones we find in our supermarkets today? Well, buckle up, because the answer might make you want to go on a vintage fruit hunt. You see, studies have shown that over the past few decades, the mineral content of our beloved apples has been on a bit of a decline. We're talking about essential minerals like calcium, magnesium, iron, and even potassium. These are the building blocks that our bodies need to function properly. And it seems like our modern apples might be skimping out on them a bit now. There are a few potential culprits behind this mineral mystery. One theory is that it's all about the soil. Intensive farming practices, while efficient, can deplete the soil of essential nutrients over time. It's kind of like constantly withdrawing money from your bank account without making any deposits. Eventually, you're going to run dry. Another factor could be the focus on certain apple varieties. In our quest for the biggest, reddest, and sweetest apples, we may have inadvertently bred out some of the varieties that were naturally higher in certain minerals. It's like focusing on one instrument in an orchestra. You might get a really loud clarinet, but the overall symphony might not be as harmonious. And let's not forget about the role of pesticides and herbicides. While these chemicals can help protect crops from pests and diseases, they can also disrupt the delicate balance of microorganisms in the soil that play a crucial role in nutrient absorption. It's like having a bouncer at a club who's a little too good at their job. They might keep out the troublemakers, but they might also accidentally turn away some paying customers. So what does this all mean for us apple enthusiasts? Well, it doesn't necessarily mean we need to swear off modern apples entirely. They're still a good source of fiber, vitamin C, and other beneficial nutrients. But it does highlight the importance of diversifying our diets and making sure we're getting those essential minerals from a variety of sources. Maybe it's time to branch out from the supermarket staples and explore some heirloom apple varieties at the farmer's market. Or maybe it's time to give those ugly apples with a few imperfections a chance. They might not be as aesthetically pleasing, but they could pack a bigger nutritional punch. Okay, so we've talked about minerals, but let's not forget about the other essential micronutrients that our bodies crave, vitamins, specifically vitamin C. This powerful antioxidant is crucial for a healthy immune system, collagen production, and even wound healing. And when it comes to apples, there's a bit of a debate brewing about whether those retro fruits packed a bigger vitamin C punch than the ones we're munching on today. Now, it's important to note that apples in general aren't exactly the top source of vitamin C out there. We're talking about citrus fruits, bell peppers, and even strawberries stealing the show in that department. But still, every little bit counts, right? Some studies suggest that apples from the 1950s might have contained higher levels of vitamin C compared to their modern counterparts. And there are a few potential explanations for this vitamin variation. Well, one theory is that it all comes down to variety. Back in the day, there was a much wider diversity of apple varieties being grown. These days, we tend to see the same few commercially popular varieties dominating supermarket shelves. And it's possible that some of those older, less common varieties were naturally higher in vitamin C. Another factor could be the way apples are stored and transported. Modern apples are often picked before they're fully ripe to extend their shelf life. And while that might be great for grocery stores, it could mean that they have less time to develop their full vitamin C potential. Plus, there's the whole issue of exposure to light and heat. Vitamin C is a bit of a delicate flower. It's easily degraded by things like sunlight and high temperatures. So, if those 1950s apples were being transported in less technologically advanced trucks and stored in less climate-controlled environments, they might have actually retained more of their vitamin C content. So, what's the takeaway here? Well, it's probably not realistic to expect to get our daily dose of vitamin C from apples alone. But it's still worth considering the factors that might be influencing the nutrient content of our food. Maybe it's time to get a little adventurous with our apple choices or explore local farms where we can learn more about how our food is grown and harvested. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, from apple DNA to vitamin content, but I think it's important to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, because this isn't just about apples, really. It's about our relationship with food, our health, and the health of the planet. The differences we see between 1950s apples and today's apples reflect broader trends in agriculture and food production. We've moved towards a system that prioritizes efficiency, uniformity, and shelf life. And while that's led to some undeniable benefits like increased food availability and affordability, it's also come at a cost. We've seen a decline in the nutritional value of many of our fruits and vegetables, including apples. We're facing challenges related to soil depletion, pesticide use, and the loss of biodiversity. And we're grappling with the potential long-term impacts of genetic modification. But here's the thing. We're not powerless in this equation. As consumers, we have a voice. We can choose to support sustainable farming practices by buying from local farmers markets or choosing organic options when available. We can advocate for greater transparency in food labeling so we know exactly what's in the products we're buying, and maybe, just maybe, we can rediscover the joy of eating seasonally, embracing the diversity of heirloom varieties, and appreciating the fact that our food doesn't always have to look perfect to be perfectly delicious and nutritious. The story of the apple is a microcosm of the story of our relationship with the natural world. It's a reminder that our choices have consequences, but it's also a source of hope. Because just like we've shaped the apple over generations, we have the power to reshape our food system for the better. It starts with awareness, education, and a willingness to make informed choices. So, the next time you bite into an apple, take a moment to appreciate its journey from orchard to table. Think about the farmers who grew it, the bees that pollinated it, and the soil that nourished it. And remember that you have the power to influence the future of food with every bite you take. Well, there you have it, folks. A deep dive into the fascinating world of apples, past and present. I hope you found this comparison as eye-opening as I did. It's amazing how much can change in just a few decades, and how those changes can impact our health and the environment. If you enjoyed this exploration of apple evolution, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more food for thought. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking questions about the world around you. And maybe, just maybe, grab yourself an apple. A delicious reminder of the interconnectedness of nature, history, and our own well-being.